An ambulance siren screaming trapped behind a woman holding a stop sign. Inside, my wife, 9 months pregnant, fought to stay conscious. And this woman, she looked me in the eye and said, "Rules don't bend for anyone. Where are you watching this from?" Because this wasn't some HOA spat over mailbox paint. This was life or death on a 150-year-old ranch, while one person's obsession with control turned the road into a battlefield. The Barrett Ranch has stood since 1874, 5 generations strong. Some call that old-fashioned. I call it survival. You ever walk land and feel ghosts walk with you? That's my mornings. Every step I swear I hear boots on the same soil. My great-great-grandfathers, my grandfather's men who bled into this ground so I could stand here. This isn't just dirt. It's memory bone deep. I wake with the sunrise slicing through that old cedar frame. And I know one truth: we belong to this land as much as it belongs to us. They built it with hands rougher than any tool piecing walls together, like scripture would, and sweat holding against storms no textbook ever wrote about. It's seen droughts, fires, recessions that chewed through neighbors' dreams, and still it stands. Folks today brag about smart homes, granite counters, and manicured lawns. Out here, our pride's in something older: oak beams that whisper when the wind shifts, iron hooks, blackened by time stones stacked so true they laugh at centuries. Some say that weight of history must feel heavy. They're wrong. It feels like armor. Inside the house breathes like a living thing. Floorboards hum under boots, walls hold the scent of cedar and coffee that seeped in over 100 years. The nursery sits in the same corner room where my father drew his first breath and his father before him. When Emma stood there, her hand over the swell of her belly, her voice dropped soft. Our boy's coming home to history. And in that moment it hit me. This wasn't nostalgia, it was defiance. Proof that roots can dig deeper than progress, deeper than every HOA and developer waiting to bulldoze our bloodline. Emma loved it all: the creak of the floorboards, sunsets that painted the barn in firelight. She'd smile and say, "Feels like the world stopped." Sometimes I believed it. She wasn't born to this life. She chose it, and that mattered more. She could have had cul-de-sac comfort Starbucks on every corner. Instead, she learned how to mend a fence, stack hay, and name constellations from our back pasture. That pride lit her eyes even on hard days. But pregnancy changes things. This wasn't just a baby. It was redemption after a loss so raw we still don't speak of it without silence weighing down the room. Her pregnancy came with warning labels: high risk, fragile, handle with care like crystal in a storm. Every doctor's visit drilled it in. Keep her calm, no stress, no spikes in blood pressure. I swore I'd shield her from every gust that rattled our gates. But fate's funny that way. Trouble doesn't knock, it kicks down doors. And the trouble wearing heels and carrying bylaws had a name: Norah Whitfield. Moved in 2 years ago with vinyl siding and an appetite for power. From day one, she made it clear our ranch didn't fit her vision of community standards. Said our barn was visual pollution. You believe that a barn that stood longer than her entire bloodline. She smiled when she spoke, but her words had teeth. At first it was suggestions: trim this paint that get rid of livestock. Then came the flyers, the meetings, the clipboard army forming like storm clouds. Her goal wasn't beauty, it was erasure. She wanted history bulldozed and our roots ripped out, replaced by pastel mailboxes and ornamental shrubs. And when she got herself crowned HOA president, she strutted like a queen with a paper crown flashing her rulebook like it was gospel. People like her don't crave harmony, they crave control. And she was about to learn. She picked the wrong family to test. The first violation showed up on a warm afternoon. Emma and I were on the porch, her belly round as a harvest moon, when Norah marched up in heels that stabbed gravel like knives. She handed me a letter, with a smile thinner than rice paper. "We need outdated properties to comply with neighborhood harmony," she said, voice syrupy sweet. I unfolded the notice: barn condemned as unsafe, livestock, prohibited outdoor business, banned. She'd taken a red pen to our life and marked X after X. I looked past her at that barn, paint faded but proud, and thought, harmony for who? My jaw tightened so hard it hurt. Walt warned me what was coming. 70 years old, tougher than barbed wire. Walt's been my neighbor since I had knees skinned from climbing his apple trees. We fixed a broken rail that night under a dying sun, sweat dripping like truth from his brow. "This ain't about pretty lawns, Colt," he muttered, spitting dust. "It's about power." She can't stand folks who don't bow. He told me stories families run out land gutted for profit culture paved in asphalt. Roots scare people like her, he said, tightening the last nail. Because roots don't move when they say so. His voice had the weight of prophecy. After that, violations hit like clockwork. Historic fence creates liability hazard. Improper heritage structures. Hell, she even wrote us up for hanging one lantern during a blackout, called it unapproved exterior lighting. Every letter was a jab, and every jab landed on Emma's shoulders. I saw it in her eyes and the way her smile faltered when she thought I wasn't looking. The doctor's warnings echoed louder with every fine stress is the enemy. But tell me, how do you build peace when war parks its SUV at your gate? Every morning, I started a file that night thick as a Bible, each paper a testament. If she wanted to fight by the book, I'd bring the whole library. Sometimes I'd find Emma in the nursery, folding baby clothes so slow it looked like prayer. We'll be okay, I'd whisper, but doubt clung like smoke. At night, lying in bed with her hand in mine, the weight of 5 generations pressed down like a storm cloud. Those walls had seen births, deaths, wars. Now they held silence so sharp it could cut. I'd stare at the ceiling and wonder, am I the last Barrett to call this home? That thought was a blade twisting under my ribs. And somewhere outside beyond those creaking gates, a woman with a clipboard was sharpening hers too. By the time Norah announced her mandatory inspection, Emma was 8.5 months along, moving like glass on the edge of a shelf. I called, explained doctor's orders for bed rest, begged for a delay. Her reply slid through the phone like ice water. Compliance isn't optional. That was the moment it clicked. This wasn't about rules anymore. It was about domination. Watching Emma flinch at the sound of tires on gravel, I felt something break in me. My great-great-grandfather didn't wrestle this land from wilderness, just so his bloodline could bow to tyranny in yoga pants. If Norah wanted war, then war is what she'd get. Only difference, I fight clean and I fight to win. The first grenade landed in our mailbox, disguised as a letter, a new HOA, Emergency Regulatory Update. The headline screamed like a verdict, effective immediately, home-based businesses are prohibited. That wasn't just a rule, it was a blade aimed straight at our lifeline, our small batch cheese business. We weren't talking some corporate operation, just a side hustle keeping us afloat through doctor's bills and Emma's prescriptions. 3 local restaurants, 1 farmer's market, a few $100 a month that made the difference between breathing easy and drowning. Norah knew that. She timed this for maximum damage. The ink smelled like blood. Doctor's words stuck like a splinter. Stress kills. And in every HOA letter, it felt like another bullet in the chamber. I watched Emma's hands tremble when she read that notice, her face draining pale as milk. We'll figure it out, I told her, but the lie burned on my tongue. Each rule stacked on the last like bricks building a wall meant to box us in. $100 fine for non-compliant structures. $200 for livestock presence. Threats of legal action if we didn't modernize. Modernize, that word tasted like rust. What it really meant, erase every trace of who we were. Erase us. Norah moved like a shadow in daylight, smooth, rehearsed, relentless. No courtesy knocks, no warning. She'd roll up unannounced in that spotless SUV clipboard, flashing like a badge. Called them routine inspections. I called them invasions. And every time those tires crunched our gravel, Emma's body stiffened like a bow pulled tight. One afternoon, I came in from fixing a fence and found her perched on the edge of the bed, knuckles white against her knees. She walked through the nursery, Emma whispered, voice splintering, said she was checking for safety hazards. The nursery. Our sanctuary. That wasn't governance, it was psychological warfare. That night, I sat at the kitchen table while Emma slept, the old clock ticking like a firing pin. I opened a yellow legal pad and started writing dates, times, violations, her words etched like scars. Every fine became evidence. Every insult turned into ammo. She thought this was a game of paper cuts. She didn't know I was building a blade sharp enough to cut her power in half. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters like bones. Inside, I made a promise to the ghosts of Barrett's past. This fight won't break here, not on my watch, not while blood still pumps in my veins. The money drain hit fast and hard. Norah's fines multiplied like weeds. 1 for the barn, 1 for the century-old stone wall, another for improper heritage features. Heritage, she spat that word like it was filth. Then came the hammer blow, a 30-day ultimatum. cease all non-compliant activities, or face enforcement action, including possible property sale. I stared at that line until the ink blurred. Forced sale. That's what she wanted all along, to drive us into a corner and rip this land from under our boots. My chest burned with something darker than anger. This wasn't negotiation. It was siege. Walt spat dust, leaned on the rail. Colt, this ain't about paint colors. This is about control. You ready for that fight? I didn't answer. Didn't need to. He saw it in my jaw, in the way my hands curled into fists like roots gripping stone. Walt knew the terrain better than anyone, 7 decades carved into his skin. Each wrinkle a map of battles fought against storms, banks, and bureaucrats. She's betting you'll fold, he said, hitching his thumb toward Norah's McMansion, shining like plastic under the sun. Don't give her the satisfaction. His tone was calm, but his eyes burned like embers fanned to flame. Emma tried to hide the cracks, but stress leaves fingerprints on everything. The tremor in her fingers, the way she flinched when gravel crunched at the gate. Sleep came in shards broken by nightmares and the ghost of sirens we hadn't heard yet. I caught her one night on the porch, rocking slow in that chair carved by my grandfather's hands, staring into the dark, like it owed her answers. "We'll be okay," I said softly. She turned eyes glassy, a half smile fighting through the storm. "Promise." That word sliced me open. I nodded anyway, because what else could I do? Truth felt like a luxury we couldn't afford. Neighbors started whispering, and whispers spread like wildfire in dry grass. Some parroted Norah's gospel about property values and community image. Others muttered sympathy eyes darting like fugitives avoiding spotlights. A few brave souls slipped quiet warnings. "She's talking to lawyers. She wants you gone." Every whisper was a spark in a tinderbox already primed to blow. I walked streets that used to feel like home and felt the weight of eyes behind blinds. Fear had a smell like cold metal and old paper, and it clung to the air. That's when I understood this wasn't just my fight. It was a reckoning waiting to happen. So I dug in like a soldier prepping trenches, pulled deeds older than the town charter from county records maps inked by hands dead a century, but still speaking through lines and seals. I called Avery Holt, a lawyer so sharp he could cut glass with his tone. Explained everything from the cheese stand to the nursery invasion. He listened in silence, then laughed low. "Dangerous. She can't touch you, Colt," he said. "Your grandfathered rights are bulletproof. And blocking emergency access?" His voice dropped steel hard. "That's criminal obstruction. If she crosses that line, she's done." His confidence poured gasoline on my fire. But while I gathered law like armor, Norah kept swinging. Posted on community boards that the ranch was unsafe for families. Sent emails claiming Emma was at risk living in a non-compliant structure. Progress, she called it. Progress tasted like poison on my tongue. Walt saw the rage simmering and poured black coffee into my hands like antidote. "You're playing chess," he said. "She's playing checkers. Don't move fast. Move right." I stared at Emma through the window. Her silhouette bent over the crib like prayer, and I swore again, this won't end with her broken. It'll end with her erased. 2 weeks left on the calendar. 2 weeks to keep Emma steady, to keep this land in our name, to keep history from being bulldozed by greed and heels. Norah thought she was winning. Thought paper had more power than roots. She didn't understand something carved into my bones. Barretts don't fold. We fortify. And every threat she wrote, every rule she tried to twist, became one more reason to sharpen my blade. The next time her SUV rolled up our drive, I'd be ready. Not with fists, not with fury, with the only weapon that never misses when the truth's on your side, law. Norah didn't slow down. She doubled down. Every letter, every violation was like a blade carving deeper into our history. She slapped a condemnation notice on the barn that stood since 1874, calling it a modern safety hazard. That barn had survived storms and wars, but now it was condemned by a woman with a clipboard and an ego. Next came the stone fence hand laid by my great-great-grandfather. She called it visual pollution. Watching her try to erase it felt like watching someone chip our name off a gravestone. My jaw locked so tight I swore I heard teeth crack. Then she aimed at the well. An artesian well dug in 1874, pulling water clean and cold for 5 generations without a single issue. Norah branded it a contamination risk and demanded immediate remediation at our cost. I read the notice twice, then laughed the kind of laugh that feels like a scream caught sideways. She wasn't enforcing codes. She was waging war one clause at a time. Every demand dripped with the same poison, make it so expensive, so stressful that we'd fold. But I wasn't folding. This wasn't a property dispute anymore. It was survival with a side of vengeance. Emma tried to hold strong, but stress has a way of leaving fingerprints on the soul. Her sleep shattered into fragments broken by dreams that made her gasp awake. Shadows darkened her eyes. She flinched at the sound of tires on gravel like they were gunshots. The doctor's warning looped in my head. Keep her calm or risk both lives. I hated leaving Emma alone. Every time the gate creaked, my gut turned to stone. I'd race back from the pasture, half expecting to find her face to face with Norah, voice shaking, blood pressure spiking. That image stalked me like a predator in tall grass. Some cheered her talk of progress. Others whispered behind curtains. But whispers don't stop wrecking balls. The split ran jagged through the neighborhood HOA. Loyalists dreaming of manicured lawns and high property values on one side. Silent skeptics praying we'd fight on the other. The air buzzed with something electric, something ugly. People I'd known for years crossed the street rather than meet my eyes. They weren't neighbors anymore. They were jurors waiting for a verdict. And Norah strutted among them like a queen convinced the crown was welded to her skull. Clipboard in hand, lips pursed in permanent judgment. Through it all, Walt became my anchor. He showed up with coffee at dawn, hammer in one hand, history in the other. Your great-great-granddaddy didn't build this for surrender, he'd say, voice low as gravel. We worked fences in silence that spoke louder than words, his presence steady as oak. When fear chewed holes in my resolve, Walt patched them with stories older than either of us. Stories of drought survived, debts, beaten lives reclaimed. She thinks rules make her strong, he muttered one night as we bolted a gate under lantern light. Roots beat rules every time. His tone was iron-wrapped in grit. While Walt fought in sweat and steel, I waged war in paper and ink. County records became my battlefield deeds, drawn in ink so old it looked like smoke statutes, thick with language sharp enough to cut through Norah's pretensions. Avery, my lawyer, met me in his office surrounded by towers of law books like ramparts. You've got grandfathered rights, Colt, he said, sliding a file across the desk. They predate zoning laws by nearly a century. She can't touch you legally. And if she tries that ambulance stunt you warned me about, that's not civil. That's criminal obstruction. His grin was a wolf baring teeth. Emma clung to hope in the smallest things, folding baby clothes with the patience of a saint, reading letters passed down from Barrett women who gave birth in this house when winters were brutal and medicine was a prayer. They made it, she whispered once, her finger tracing faded ink like scripture. So will we. But fear cast long shadows in her eyes. Every spike in her blood pressure felt like a countdown. I'd sit in the nursery at night, staring at the crib we built together, and wonder if this fight would cost us the very life it was meant to protect. That thought burned like acid. Norah sensed the cracks and pressed harder. She pushed stories to the local paper, historic property unsafe for families, community standards threatened by non-compliance. Reporters showed up snapping photos of Emma's belly like it was headline candy. I stood on the porch, fists stuffed in my pockets, rage burning under my skin, while cameras clicked like gunfire. Norah spun her fiction into threads so tight they strangled truth, painting herself as the savior of modern living. She wasn't just attacking wood and stone, she was rewriting who we were. But history isn't a tweet. And I wasn't about to let her go viral on our graves. Walt called her bluff publicly. At the feed store, in front of men who'd known his word longer than Norah's face, he spoke loud enough to echo, "Progress ain't bulldozing roots for profit." His voice carried like gospel, and heads nodded like congregants finding faith again. Rumors flipped sides that day. Whispers turned into questions. Questions turned into resistance. And through it all, I kept stacking bricks of evidence, laying a wall of law she couldn't climb. Norah wanted a war fine, but this battlefield wasn't hers. It was mine, and it was older than her ambition by 150 years. One evening I stood on the porch watching the sun bleed over the hills my great-great-grandfather once cleared, with nothing but grit and faith. Wind tugged at the barn roof, whispering stories I'd heard since I could walk. My boots dug into soil soaked with 5 generations of sweat and stubbornness. "Not today," I muttered to no one and everyone at once. Behind me, Emma breathed slow, in the rocking chair, one hand curved over the life inside her. That sight hit me harder than any violation notice ever could. This wasn't about nostalgia. This was bloodbone and future, and I was done playing nice. The day began like any other, calm enough to feel suspicious in hindsight. Emma moved slow that morning, one hand braced on the kitchen table, her breath measured. She was 38 weeks along. Her body stretched tight like a drumskin ready to tear. We'd planned this moment, bags packed by the door routes to the hospital rehearsed, until I could drive them blindfolded. I thought we were ready for anything. But plans are paper, and life has teeth. The first cramp came while she buttered toast, her face tightening as if the air itself had turned sharp. "Colt," she whispered, and that whisper hollowed me out. Minutes blurred into panic. Contractions slammed in waves closer, each time ripping the air into jagged pieces. The doctor's warning blared in my skull. "Get her here fast, or risk both lives." I dialed 911 with hands slick as rain, voice cracking as I shouted our address. "Help's on the way," the operator said, calm as a statue. Then came the siren, thin at first, then swelling a hymn in steel and sound. For a moment, hope felt solid. The ambulance rolled through the gate, white and red, slicing the morning like a blade. Paramedics moved like soldiers, measured, efficient, but their eyes carried urgency. Emma clutched my hand, sweat streaking her temples, lips pale as chalk. "Stay," she breathed, voice breaking on the word. "I'm here," I swore, kissing her forehead, tasting salt and fear. They strapped her to the gurney, voices clipped in a language of codes I didn't speak, but understood with my gut danger. "We've got to move now." The lead medic barked, slamming the rear doors. Gravel spat under their tires as the ambulance swung toward the road. I sprinted to my truck, heart hammering hard enough to shake the cab. 12 minutes to the hospital if we hit the straight route. 12 minutes that meant everything. We didn't make it 12 minutes. We didn't make it 2. You ever see a stop sign feel like a weapon? I did that day. She was there, Norah planted dead center in the road, like a general blocking retreat. Power red blazer clipboard tucked under one arm, and in her hands, a literal stop sign, bright and cruel under the sun. The ambulance braked hard, tires screaming. My throat went raw as I slammed my door and bolted forward. "Move!" I roared, fists clenched so tight they might snap bone. She didn't move an inch. Her smile was carved from ice. "Emergency vehicles require board clearance," she said, voice dripping with smug control. The lead medic leaned out the window, voice vibrating with rage barely leashed by professionalism. "Ma'am, step aside. We have a critical patient. Every second counts." Norah's chin tilted like a queen granting audience. "Protocol applies to everyone. Rules keep order." Behind those words was something else, something feral. This wasn't about order. This was about domination. Emma's moan cut through the standoff, raw and broken from inside that rig. It tore something primal loose in me. "She's in labor complications," I shouted, shaking with fury. Norah's eyes glinted like glass catching fire. "Then you should have complied sooner," she said. My vision tunneled red. I swear the world tilted, then the hum of the engine, the hiss of heat, her voice coiling like barbed wire. I wanted to rip that stop sign from her hands and fling her into the ditch. Walt's voice cracked the spell like a rifle shot. "What in God's name is this?" he thundered, boots pounding, gravel phone raised and recording. "You're blocking an ambulance." His voice carried across the fields like Judgment Day. Norah turned, mask cracking just enough for fear to flicker in her eyes. Walt didn't stop. "Keep talking, sweetheart," he growled. "The world's gonna love seeing this." His tone was gasoline, and she was already burning. But Norah clung to her delusion like a drowning woman grips driftwood. "This is private property. Community protocols must be observed." She spat, but her voice trembled now. The paramedic snapped. "Lady, move or we'll move you!" The driver barked, knuckles white on the wheel. My gut screamed to drag her out of the road myself. But I knew one wrong move could land me in cuffs and cost Emma the seconds she didn't have. Then the siren wailed again, loud enough to shake leaves from branches, and the ambulance jerked hard right. Gravel exploded as it tore down the side road, the long way. 45 minutes of hell. I gunned my truck headlights, drilling holes in the dust cloud they left behind. Each curve felt like a countdown. I gripped the wheel and thought, this can't be real, but it was. Trees blurred into streaks, road twisting like a coiled snake under my tires. The red strobe of the ambulance flashed ahead, sometimes vanishing, then reappearing like hope teasing me through a storm. My mouth was sand. My hands were iron. I prayed out loud, half words crashing into each other, bargaining with every ghost that ever walked this land. Just let her make it. Let them both make it. I'll burn the world if I have to. Inside that rig, Emma fought like a soldier, bleeding out on foreign soil. Later, they told me what I couldn't see: the oxygen mask clamped to her face, medics barking commands sharp as gunfire, 4 lines snaking into her arms, one medic pounding out vitals like a drummer in a death march. I caught fragments through the rear window shadows, lunging, jerking, the flash of a needle glinting under fluorescent light. My phone buzzed in the console screen, flashing updates I couldn't read because my eyes were chained to those taillights. They were the tether between me and the abyss, yawning wide enough to swallow everything I loved. When the hospital finally broke over the horizon, white walls blazing under noon sun, my chest cracked with something like hope and agony fused. The ambulance skidded to a stop under the portico, and before I could kill my engine, they had Emma through the double doors, swallowed by sterile light. I lunged after them, only to hit a wall of blue scrubs. "We've got her," the nurse said, voice calm but laced with urgency. Then she was gone, carried into the belly of the beast, where I couldn't follow. The silence that fell wasn't peace, it was a blade pressed to my throat, cold and merciless. Minutes crawled like crippled soldiers. I paced trenches in tile fists cracking against each other, mind replaying every second under that stop sign. Her smile, that stop sign. Emma's cry strangled behind steel doors. If I'd done more, faster would we be here now. Guilt gnawed like rats in my gut. Then the door swung and the doctor stepped out, mask-dangling eyes steady as iron. My breath stopped. "They're alive," he said, words soft as rain but heavy as mountains. It was close. Another 10 minutes and we'd be having a different talk. My knees buckled. Relief hit like a hammer swung from heaven. I pressed my palms to the cold wall, sucking air like a drowning man, a sound tearing from my throat I barely recognized. Gratitude came first, then fury, pure molten uncut. Norah hadn't just crossed a line. She'd salted the earth, torched it, danced on the ashes. This wasn't a property fight anymore. This was war, and she'd handed me the weapon I needed: proof. Obstruction of emergency care, criminal, airtight, unforgivable. I walked out of that hospital under a sky sharp as steel, with one vow seared into bone. She thought she'd broken me. She'd forged me. And next time we met, she wouldn't see rage. She'd see reckoning. The hospital cafeteria buzzed with low hums and clinking trays, but for me, the world had narrowed to a booth and a pile of papers that could change everything. Emma and our son were safe upstairs, and yet my hands still shook like they were gripping the steering wheel on that mountain road. Relief didn't cool the fire, it fed it. Norah had gambled with my family's lives. Now she was about to learn what happens when you bet against Barrett blood. That's why I called Avery Holt a man who treated law like a loaded gun and never missed. He arrived dressed like the verdict was already written, navy suit sharp as a blade, cufflinks flashing under the flicker of fluorescent lights. He dropped a leather folder on the table with the weight of a judge's gavel. "You've got more than a case," he said, voice calm, dangerous. His fingers flipped through deeds and statutes like a gambler riffling cards. Then he stopped and tapped the yellow document I'd carried like scripture since this war began. "This," he said, eyes locking on mine, "is your shield and your sword." He tapped the deed, grinning. "Colt, she's toast." For the first time in weeks, I laughed, and it felt like breathing fire. Avery leaned in, lowering his voice until it rumbled like distant thunder. "Here's the lay of the land. Barrett Ranch predates her HOA by almost a century. That means grandfathered rights so ironclad she couldn't chip them with a jackhammer. Zoning irrelevant. Aesthetic codes, smoke in the wind. You're untouchable on every front that matters." My chest swelled, the tightness that had coiled there for months, unraveling one steel thread at a time. But then Avery's grin widened, like he'd been saving the best for dessert. "And that ambulance stunt," he paused, letting the silence hum like a live wire. "That's not civil. That's criminal obstruction." The words landed like a hammer on stone, clean and final. Criminal obstruction, 2 syllables that sounded like Judgment Day for Norah Whitfield. I saw it as clear as the ink on those pages: her stop sign, her smug smirk, her voice dripping venom while Emma fought for air in the back of that rig. Avery wasn't smiling now. He was cold, surgical. "If you want justice, we'll give it to you. But, Colt, we can do more than punish her. We can erase her throne entirely." He pulled another sheet from the folder and slid it across the formica like a loaded pistol. "Read that line." I scanned the text, heartbeat pounding in my ears. Buried in HOA. Bylaws. There it was, a clause quiet as a snake in tall grass. 60% of property owners may vote to dissolve the association at any time. Avery's finger tapped it once, crisp as a gunshot. That's your nuke. Get 60% and the HOA dies where it stands. I stared at the words, then at him, then back again. 60%, I murmured. Avery's grin flashed like steel. Kill the head the snake can't bite. And you've got the motive and the momentum. That night, I walked into Emma's hospital room, with the claws burning a hole in my pocket like contraband. She sat propped against pillows, our son swaddled against her chest, his tiny breath a rhythm steadier than my own. Her eyes met mine, tired but fierce. You found a way, she whispered. I nodded, throat tight. Not just for us, I said, laying the paper in her lap. For everyone who's sick of living under her boot. Emma traced the line with one finger, lips curving into something between a smile and a vow. Do it, she said softly. End this for good. In that moment, my wife wasn't just a survivor. She was a general blessing the war. Word spread like fire on dry brush. I started with the people who had flinched under Norah's leash, the longest parents fined for swing sets, retirees written up for flower pots, families sick of being ruled by fear. If it happened to Emma, I told them it could happen to you. Most didn't need convincing. The ambulance video made sure of that. Walt's footage was a guillotine slicing through every excuse Norah had ever crafted. One look at her blocking that rig smiling, while a woman in labor cried out, and neighbors who once cowered found their voices. Signatures came fast, not all but enough to feel the tide turning. Walt became my right hand, moving like smoke through backyards and porches, coffee in one hand, petition in the other. You want safety? He'd rumble eyes flinty as old nails. Start with an ambulance getting through without permission slips. His presence was gospel. People trusted him because he had buried fence posts with their grandfathers, hauled hay in storms, kept their secrets and their gates. When doubt flickered, Walt stomped it out with a look. This ain't about lawns, he'd say, voice like iron on gravel. It's about freedom, or what's left of it. Watching him work was like watching roots crack concrete. Meanwhile, Norah spun like a storm eating its own tail. Threat letters stuffed mailboxes like poisoned candy. Dissolve the HOA and your property value tanks. Legal action will bankrupt every signer. She called emergency meetings no one attended, left voicemails shrill with panic. At one point, she even mailed flyers claiming predators would roam unchecked if her rules vanished. Fear had always been her weapon. Now it clanged hollow. Screenshots of her rants lit up group chats with laughing emojis instead of trembling thumbs. The Queen still had her crown, but the court was already gone. By week's end, the number sat solid in Avery's briefcase. 62% of homeowners signed, sealed, notarized. Enough to bury an empire. He laid the stack on my kitchen table, like bricks for a gallows. Once I file, he said, voice solemn as scripture, there's no going back. I thought of Emma, in that hospital bed, of our son, blinking into a world that almost stole him before his first breath. I thought of my great-great-grandfather, carving this ranch out of raw earth, and of a stop sign held like a weapon in the hands of a tyrant. No going back, I said, gripping the pen so hard it nearly split. Then I signed my name like a man driving a spike into the heart of a monster. That night, Emma stood with me on the porch, baby cradled in her arms, the wind threading cedar and hay through the dark. You're shaking, she murmured. I'm boiling, I said, a grim smile tugging my mouth. She brushed her lips over mine like a seal on a pact. Tomorrow, she whispered, eyes fierce under the moon, we take back our lives. And somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled a wild, defiant sound that felt like a war cry. Tomorrow wasn't just a vote, it was Judgment Day, and I intended to watch her empire burn down to embers she couldn't ever light again. The 72-hour notice ticked like a time bomb, every second dragging a shadow across the neighborhood. Avery had printed the question in bold letters, sharp enough to cut glass. Should the Homeowners Association be dissolved and cease all operations immediately? 7 words that would decide everything. Our freedom, our legacy, the air Emma and I would breathe, raising our son. When I taped that notice on the community board, my hands didn't shake from doubt. They shook from pressure, from the weight of 5 generations pressing down like storm clouds before a tornado. Those 3 days crawled with tension that seeped through every crack in the walls. Conversations became chess matches. Smiles were masks. Handshakes felt like signed treaties in blood. Every knock felt like Russian roulette. You never knew which neighbor held the bullet. Would it be support or betrayal? Whispers hissed behind closed doors. Phones buzzed with rumors, and fear slithered between houses like smoke. I walked the gravel roads at night with my fists in my pockets, memorizing porch lights like battle positions, swearing under my breath that I wouldn't let Emma see the weight grinding me down. Norah didn't sit idle. She clawed for control like a drowning queen, her emails spilling venom, her flyers promising doom. Dissolve the HOA, and your home equity collapses. Vote yes, and predators roam unchecked. She left voicemails like curses threatening lawsuits so big they'd ruin generations. Her words reeked of desperation, but desperation makes people dangerous. Each time I read one of her rants, rage pulsed through me like a second heartbeat. I thought of Emma in that ambulance, her breath shallow, her hand clutching mine while sirens screamed against a stop sign. That image burned hotter than any fear Norah could conjure. The final meeting was set in the old community hall, a building that smelled of sawdust and memories older than Norah's empire. By the time I walked through the double doors, boots scuffing the worn wood, my pulse was a drumbeat in my ears. The petition sat under my arm like a blade honed for war. Avery stood by the ballot box in his navy suit, calm as a man who had seen verdicts written before the first word was spoken. He nodded once, a silent, "You're ready." I wasn't sure I was, but ready had nothing to do with it now. Emma walked in right after me, our son swaddled in a blanket patterned with blue horses, his tiny breath warm against her chest. She moved slow but sure, like every step was a stake hammered into the ground we refused to surrender. Conversations died when people saw her. Even the loudest HOA. Loyalists shifted in their seats, shame flickering like shadows across their faces. Norah stood near the podium wrapped in a blood-red dress that glared under fluorescent lights. Her binder hung from one arm like a scepter, fingers twitching against the leather. Her smile was painted on, but her eyes, wild glassy, betrayed the panic boiling underneath. The meeting opened with her voice sharp, clipped desperate. If this vote passes, she hissed, property values will nosedive. Crime will skyrocket. Without order, this neighborhood becomes chaos. She spewed buzzwords like shrapnel, stability, integrity, safety. But her words didn't land like they used to. They hung in the air, brittle and hollow, cracking under the weight of what everyone had seen. Blocking an ambulance isn't order. It's tyranny in a pressed suit. And now everyone knew it. Then Emma stepped forward. No podium, no script, just a mother who'd crawled out of hell and came back swinging. She tightened her hold on our son, drew a breath and said, "No parent should beg to save their child." She didn't shout, didn't need to. The room froze. Her voice carried more weight than every HOA bylaw ever written. She let the silence breathe, then added, "This isn't about property values. It's about values. About whether rules matter more than life." Her words didn't rise, they cut slow and clean through the marrow of every fear Norah had planted. When she finished, the quiet hit like a wave pulling every sound out to sea. You could hear boots shift on old floorboards, papers rustle like dry leaves. Then Walt stood up slow, as sunrise, his weathered hat clutched in both hands. "I've lived here 70 years, he said, voice gravel and gospel. Seen this place before. HOA, as before rules started choking folks. Back then, we didn't need bylaws to tell us right from wrong. We just knew. Blocking an ambulance ain't right, never will be. You want community, start there." His words landed heavy as stones dropped in a well ripples spreading through every eye in that hall. Norah tried to rally, spit legal jargon toss, threats like darts, but no one flinched. Her mask was cracking. You could see it in the twitch of her jaw, the pitch of her voice scraping higher with every plea. People who once cowered now stared back, arms folded, jaws set. The queen had her crown, but the kingdom was gone. And then Avery called for the vote. One question, one answer. Hands moved slow, deliberate, like history itself was holding the pen. Each ballot sliding into the box sounded louder than thunder in that brittle silence. Avery counted twice. Then a third time, his fingers calm, precise. When he looked up, the verdict gleamed in his eyes before the words left his lips. 78% in favor, he said, voice carrying like a gavel strike. The Homeowners Association is dissolved, effective immediately. For a beat, no one breathed. Then the dam burst, cheers, claps, a few tears. Emma gripped my arm so hard it hurt, whispering, "It's over." I stared at the numbers neat in Avery's hand. and felt something inside me snap loose, a knot months tight finally breaking. The war was over, and we had won. Norah didn't scream, didn't beg. She just stood there, binder dangling from her fingertips, red dress glaring like a wound under the buzzing lights. For the first time, she looked small, like a tyrant stripped of her throne in front of her own court. Walt tipped his hat as he passed her, grin slicing through the tension like a blade. "Told you, sweetheart," he said. She flinched but said nothing, not a word, just stared at the floor like maybe the answers were hidden in those scuffed boards. But the only thing down there was the dust of her power turning to ash. When I stepped outside, the air felt different, lighter, freer, like the whole neighborhood exhaled at once. I pulled Emma close, kissed our son's soft forehead, and whispered, "We're safe now." But deep down, another truth burned like coal in my chest. Safe wasn't enough, not after what she'd done. Tonight we celebrated. Tomorrow we made sure she answered for every second Emma fought for breath in the back of that ambulance. The gavel had fallen, but justice was just getting warmed up. The vote wasn't just numbers on paper, it was a funeral for fear. 78% had chosen freedom over control, and with that the HOA died before midnight. Its bylaws, its fines, its iron grip on every porch light and fence post, all gone in a single gavel strike. The air felt different the next morning, like someone had scrubbed the sky clean. For the first time in months, I stepped outside without bracing for another letter, another threat. The gravel crunched under my boots, and it didn't sound like tension anymore. It sounded like peace stretching its limbs after a long winter. Word spread faster than prairie fire. By noon, the HOA office was gutted, binders dumped in boxes, nameplates pried off doors. Someone had chalked 3 words across the front wall in letters, big as life, "Freedom lives here." Walt leaned against his truck, coffee in hand, grinning like a man who'd watched a storm tear through and leave the air sweeter. "Smells like victory," he said, squinting at the sun. I chuckled, the sound rusty from disuse. "Smells like fresh paint and no more fines," I shot back. For the first time in a long time, joking didn't feel like whistling past a graveyard. It felt real, solid, ours. But freedom wasn't the only news rolling through town. Avery called that afternoon, voice humming with something sharp and electric. "You sitting down?" he asked. My gut tightened. "Say it," I growled. His chuckle was low cold. "Your queen bee didn't just block an ambulance, she raided the hive. $52,000 siphoned from HOA, funds straight into her personal paradise. Spa weekends, luxury resorts, designer junk, she paraded like trophies." The words hit like a hammer wrapped in velvet, satisfying and brutal all at once. "Charges?" I asked, even though I already knew. Avery's tone sharpened, criminal stacked high enough to blot out the sun. "She's finished." When the warrant dropped, the neighborhood didn't gasp. They roared. Screens lit up with Norah's mugshot memes popping like fireworks, her stop sign photoshopped with "game over." Her face pasted onto movie villains. Group chats that once trembled at her name now laughed so hard they choked. Even the folks who'd clung to her promises of order and integrity turned their backs like shutters slamming in a storm. Fear wasn't just gone, it had flipped, chewing her to pieces in public view. Norah Whitfield, the queen of control, reduced to a cautionary tale with a booking number and a court date. But revenge wasn't what warmed me most. It was what came after. The street that had felt like a minefield bloomed with color and sound. Kids zipped down driveways on bikes without measuring tape, policing their fun. Families dragged out grills and folding chairs for block parties no one needed permission for. Someone painted their front door bright yellow just because they could, and no one filed a complaint. It wasn't chaos. It was community, the kind my great-great-grandfather believed in when he drove the first post into this soil. No bylaws, no binders, no fear, just neighbors looking out for neighbors like it used to be. The ranch stood quiet through it all, but not silent. It breathed again the way old things do when the weight's been lifted. The barn glowed copper under sunset the same way it had for 5 generations, and for the first time in months, I looked at it without wondering if I was the last Barrett who'd see it standing. Inside, Emma rocked our son in the same chair that had soothed babies through wars and droughts. Her smile wasn't brittle anymore. It was soft, easy, whole. I stood in the doorway watching them like a man staring at the answer to every prayer he'd ever whispered into the dark. Norah's stop sign, the one she planted across an ambulance like a weapon, sat bagged in an evidence locker now. Once a symbol of power, now a relic of hubris gathering dust. That image stuck with me, not because of what it meant to her, but because of what it meant to us. She thought control could cage people, thought rules could strangle roots, but roots run deeper than paper and ink deeper than greed. And when you try to rip them out, all you do is teach them how to grip harder. She'll learn that lesson behind bars. Or maybe she won't. Either way, it's carved in this land now. The night the news broke wide, headlines flashing her crimes networks, chewing over every detail, I stood at the property line, boots planted in soil, my blood had claimed for 150 years. The wind carried the scent of cedar and distant rain, the same smell my great-great-grandfather once breathed, when this was all raw promise and grit. Emma walked up beside me, our son bundled in her arms, his tiny breath warm against her collarbone. She slipped her free hand into mine without a word. The quiet wrapped around us like a blessing, thick and sure. For the first time, quiet didn't feel like waiting for a fight. It felt like living again. I thought about everything it took to get here, the fines, the threats, the ambulance's wail trapped behind a stop sign. Thought about the night staring at the ceiling, wondering if history would end with me. And then I looked at my son, pink-cheeked and dreaming, and the weight of all that broke into something simple. I looked at my son and thought, this is it. This is why you fight. Not for barns or fences, for breath, for tomorrow. Because in the end, that's what every battle comes down to, whether the people you love get to wake up in a world where they're free. And as long as this ranch stands, that answer will always be yes. You know, standing there at the edge of my land, watching Emma rock our boy in that old chair, I couldn't help but think quiet sure as hell doesn't come easy, does it? Maybe that's the point, though. Sometimes you've got to burn through the worst to remember what matters. If this hit you, tell me. Have you ever had a moment where you realized rules don't mean a damn thing compared to life? Drop it in the comments, I'd love to hear. And hey, if you want to keep stories like this alive, hit that, like maybe subscribe to QA Stories. And if you're feeling generous, there's that little thanks button down below, no pressure. All right, stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next story.
You watched it. You felt it. Now share it with someone who loves drama even more than you. That's the QA Stories way.